Welcome to RohmerCast, a podcast about Eric Rohmer, his films, his working methods, and anything else we want to talk about related to Eric Rohmer. I'm Liam Billingham.
Wait, what? I thought you were Sean Son of Ratna.
Oh, I was just going off the script. I should have improvised a little bit more, like the movie we'll be talking about today.
Did you hit record? Are you rolling?
I'm rolling. Let's
do
a sync.
Let's do a quick sync.
Yeah.
3,
2, 1.
Okay, cool. Well, I'll cut that sync sound out, but I'll leave in the lead up so people are like, oh, they're going to do a sync sound, and then it won't be there anymore.
But you know what's great? Our sync is also off, so maybe you should keep the sync in there too, because it's kind of charming.
People are going to be like, how incompetent are these guys? Welcome to the podcast. Sean, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I just took a lovely walk, was reading some Rohmer, reading some interviews, and I can't stop prepping emotionally for what I think, and intellectually and poetically, and this movie. I don't know. It's just I think I've found my favorite Rohmer film so far. And
so second. Yeah. So that's it's actually not my favorite of the Rohmers we've talked about so far. So this is very exciting.
It's my favorite of what we've watched so far, and it's my favorite of what I've seen of his work, period. So out of the this has become a new canon favorite movie of mine. And I think if there had to be a movie I could show everyone in the world that I really think could make the world a better place, this is the movie. And I'm not saying that in any kind of bullshit way.
All right, slow your roll there, Maverick. By the way, the movie I would show everybody is Top Gun Maverick. The film we're talking about today is The Four Adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle. We'll get there. Before we jump into the movie, which I'm very excited to discuss with you as always, we should start with we have a new segment. We need jingle music for our new segment. So I'm going to say the name of the segment, and then I want you to write theme music right now.
Just cool.
With your voice. Ready?
With my voice,
Welcome to our new segment, Rohmer in the Air.
Rohmer
in the air. Wow, that was actually not bad. That was not bad. Rohmer in the Air.
I took inspiration from the song.
From the song in the movie, I thought so. Rohmer in the Air is a new segment where we talk about real-life Rohmer connections we've made and to the podcast. This title was given to us by a friend of the podcast, Austin Ratchless, who is a pal of mine, and said, I think you guys should have called the show Rohmer in the Air, which we're not going to do, but we will call a special segment. That's
a really great title.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Austin. Maybe for coming up with it. Before we jump into that, though, what the point of this segment, all right, is to talk about real life encounters with Rohmer or people talking about Rohmer or whatever the case might be. I have 2 for this episode. Do you have any, Sean?
I have 1.
Okay, great. I'll do mine quickly. One is that our friend Tim Noble, who's a Twitter buddy and a human being that I sort of know in real life, started watching Eric Rohmer movies and tweeted at me with a photo, I believe from Claire's knee, being like, are you happy? And I was like, well, no, I'm never actually happy, but I am happy that you're watching Rohmer films. The second and the more significant one is I was recently, not at Disneyland, I want to be specific, but at a Disneyland hotel.
That's much better.
Much better. And I was wearing my Paulina Laplace hat made by Human Boy Worldwide.
That's the most fucking pretentious but amazing fucking thing to wear to a Disney World.
Yeah, Disney. That was such a thing.
That was an intentional choice, and you needed to make a statement that like, I'm here for my kid. This is cool, but I like cinema.
Well, in fairness, we did get to swim in a pool for like 5 hours, so like I'm down with that. I am not wearing my Paulina Laplace hat today. I am wearing my, we should get a screenshot of this, my Irma Vep hat.
Very cool Irma Vep hat.
Very cool Irma Vep hat.
With the text treatment of the original.
Of the original. And I, let me get a quick picture of it as you drink is that an energy drink?
No, it's a beer. But it does have an energy drink sort of look to it.
I love this picture because I'm leaning forward with my hat and my ridiculous mustache, and you're like clutching a beer. It's like really good. It's really good content. So I was wearing my Paulina Laplace hat, and the parking attendant, who probably was 25 and wearing like a Disneyland vest, was like, looking at me as the car was getting, parked, the valet parking lot. He wasn't like, he was sort of managing that. And he was like, that's funny. I didn't know that like Eric Rohmer had his own line of merch. And I was like, I was like, yeah, it's cool. And I was just very, very like, wow, this Disneyland parking attendant, you were meant for better things, my friend. If you're an Eric Rohmer, no disrespect to people that like Disney World, I was very moved by the fact that parking there. Yeah, hell, I mean, most of LA would fall apart without parking attendants. So kudos to him. I hope he gets back to Eric Rohmer soon. It was very cool of him. What's your Rohmer in the air?
My Rohmer in the air. In a few weeks, I'm going to be doing a screening series at a local natural wine bar in the neighborhood in Ridgewood called Esther. And so after talking to the owner, talking to other people at the bar, and then the question came up like, what kind of movies would you be interested in showing? And I talked about
Michael Bay.
Like Michael Bay, or like, I mean, that could absolutely be in the screening series.
I just am trying to mention Michael Bay in every episode of this podcast.
Oh, I think that's great.
A little bit of balance. Bit of balance.
That's good for SEO, probably. I don't know.
I mean, who knows? We'd have to transcribe the podcast first for that to happen. So what are you going to show?
So I bring up Rohmer. Well, I'm never going to actually say the series is called Redacted. So we'll never know what movie is going to screen. There's going to be like little hints and descriptions, but anything identifiable is going to be blacked out. Part of this is for legal reasons. So this way it's not like we're promoting a screening. It's just like a free community thing. But, not...
This is a total tangent. I don't think you have to worry about the legal implications at all for such a small gathering. But we can talk about that later.
Yeah,
I think you're fine. Anyway, that's cool. That's a cool pitch.
And so one of the movies that I would love to show like every single Rohmer movie, but I was just telling some of these folks about Rohmer, and I was describing Boyfriends and Girlfriends, and they were both just so like, so this is playing at Metrograph right now? Okay, cool. I gotta go. And just a moment of like never having heard Rohmer, and then in just telling them what one of the films is about, the moment of like, oh shit, this sounds adult, this sounds interesting, and like I really want to see this. And so like this is an interaction of folks that just were intrigued by this concept of like adult cinema that reflects life.
So, Sean, would you ever show at your screening series? Would you ever show the Four Adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle?
I would absolutely want to show the Four Adventures of Reinette and Mirabelle.
Which is the film we're talking about today. Would you like to read the description, or should I read the description?
I read it last time, so I'd love your reading of the plot summary.
Okay, I did get an acting degree, so let me just get emotionally prepped. Let me go watch the movie. I'll be back in an hour and 40 minutes. All right, here we go. Shot quickly in and around Paris during a production break on Rohmer's La Rayon Vert, this breezy, witty film traces the exploits of two young women, one an ethnology student from the city, the other an unsophisticated aspiring artist from the country. Reinette and Mirabelle become instant friends upon meeting in the first of 4 vignettes that make up the film. And in their first 2 days together, they decide to become roommates in Paris. Throughout the 3 remaining stories, they encounter many of the inevitable characters of a modern city. The impossible waiter, the metro station hustler, and the snooty gallery owner. A Metrograph Pictures release. This summary is also from Metrograph, so thank you for writing that. It's always hard to summarize a movie. Mm-hmm. This one does a pretty good job. I don't think it hints at the depths of what we're about to talk about.
Yeah.
Should we talk about who's the cast and crew of this film? Would you like to read it? Would you read it? I just read the summary. All right, go for it. Plus, you can deal with the French pronunciation. Bye.
Oh, lovely. So the movie was directed by Eric Rohmer. It was written by Eric Rohmer and Joël Miquel. Joël Miquel is the actor that plays Reinette. This is really interesting. So a lot of the idea for this movie comes from her as a person and situations that she's been in that ended up becoming some of the comic episodes that we see. The cinematography is by Sophie Mantegnou, and the sound department rotated between 3 sound people. This movie was made with a crew of 3 people, all extraneous, or not what he perceived to be extraneous, but unnecessary for the streamlined approach that he wanted to go for was cut. So this movie was made with him, sound, camera, That's
You
it.
might hear me ruffling around because I'm opening my Rohmer biography that I'm reading, and there is one name that I think needs to be brought up that is not in this outline, which is Francois Ettergaray, who is a supervisor who housed the team for the shoot in the country. So there was this person who sort of helped facilitate the shooting of the country scenes. But yes, largely a crew of three people. It was, and there was an editor and music also. Do you want to talk about those?
Yep. It was edited by Maria Luisa Garcia, who would edit. Has edited a number of his films and would continue to edit his movies.
And work with him very closely.
The music is by Jean-Louis Valero, who's also worked on a lot of his movies and was part of the music for The Aviator's Wife as well. And the main other actor, it's starring Joelle McHale as Reinette and Jessica Ford as Mirabelle, and Fabrice Lucchini as the art dealer.
One of the great scenes.
Lots of really great bit characters
for sure. And Philippe Laudenbach is the waiter, and Marie Revere, who played a prominent role in The Aviator's Wife, as the grifter. Briefly, film came in 1987. The running time here says 102 minutes, but I think it's closer to 100 minutes. It was distributed by Le Film du Lusange, who's like a very, very famous French distribution company that's just distributed a lot of stuff. Maybe we can do a whole episode about them. But this film is the first production of the Eric Rohmer Company, which he created to give himself more autonomy and more control over the production of his films. And it's in French, and it was produced in France. It was produced in France.
As will every single movie he's ever made.
That's got to be true. Okay, some interesting facts about the production that we can just jump right into. The film was based on stories told to Rohmer by Joelle McHale, who hounded Rohmer and his assistant to meet him for a long time. He liked her and he found her stories extraordinary, so he decided to make the film. As a digression, there was consideration about making like more episodes, more scenes with these two women. And that didn't happen for, I think, interpersonal reasons that we can get into.
Oh, interesting.
Among those is that Rohmer had to replace Anne-Laure Marie, who played a part in Aviator's Wife, because she could not get along with Joelle McHale, who played Reinette. Also,
just on that note, that's like an interesting alternate reality movie because for those of you that have seen The Aviator's Wife, Anne-Laure Moray has a very different vibe, very different personality from Jessica Ford, and this movie would have been a completely different movie. Not saying that it wouldn't be good or anything; it'd be just totally different.
Well, Jessica Ford's like pretty bewitching in this movie in this way, and I think it'd be a very different movie. The way that this is described is that it was made during a production break of Le Renvers, like a week off, which is not true. They shot it over 6 weeks, over 10 months, mainly on weekends and during vacations. So Rohmer kind of like put the production of this together based on these actresses. It was semi-improvised, semi-scripted. He actually quit production numerous times because of how frustrating he found Joelle McHale.
Wow.
Jessica Ford also did not get along well with her. And I think there's something here to discuss about this because I have a lot of feelings about Reinette that I want to get into.
That's really interesting. So what I'm reading is the Eric Rohmer Interviews book, which has been an amazing resource edited by Fiona Handyside. And in the book, in this interview, he's talking about Joelle McHale, like meeting her, and one of the first things she says to him is like this: "I organized my life according to principles." Found her fascinating, and he found that she quite reminds him of himself in certain aspects of like the way they look at life. He feels closer to Reinette, and in some of the sort of naivete that exists.
That's interesting.
Which is interesting, yeah. And like, I never would have gathered what you had said about the production, and also great to know that like cumulatively it was a short amount of time, but I hadn't realized how spread out this had been.
Yeah, I think they had to do it when they weren't shooting the other stuff, and it was kind of, it's a really interesting way to shoot a movie. We traditionally think of it as like you batten down the hatches and do it in this period of time, and only certain films have suggested an alternative to that on any kind of mainstream level. I think the most obvious being Boyhood, which was shot over a period of like 10 years, which weirdly,
then you have Shadows.
This is not me disrespecting the movie at all, but like is a movie that people have kind of forgotten about. It's really, really interesting. I feel like no one talks about it anymore. Why don't you talk a little bit about the production crew? You mentioned this before. There were 3 people on set. Himself, Sophie Metayu, and 3 sound people.
Yep.
No lights.
3 rotating sound people. Paul Berthaud, Pierre Camus, and Pascal Ribière. This small crew coming from this idea of how much can you streamline production,
and save money.
And save money. And ultimately, he's a producer of his own movies. And for the kinds of movies he's trying to make, it doesn't benefit the production and the storytelling to have the larger machinery. Even in talking about improvisation, he talks about how the more scripted something is, the more precise you need to be with your scheduling, because there's continuity, there's all these other factors. But in episodic construction, episodic storytelling, with the kind of improvisation that he was interested in doing with this, being as natural and as like kind of impromptu, having that space to be like, you know what, we're going to film at a supermarket tomorrow, and just be able to do it. To be able to film on the street. It's like you couldn't do that with a bunch of assistants. You couldn't do that with the mechanism.
Industrial filmmaking requires a certain formula. It's the idea that like the means of production inform the aesthetic of the movie, right? So one thing that this is interesting about is that there's no AD, which makes sense because they needed a way. There was no departments to communicate between. And sometimes I feel, having been never been on a big set, but like only having been on small sets, but even on small sets, you always feel like there's this like stress to get through things. I might edit that sound out, but it's always very stressful. And this sounds like it's the alleviation of stress and just letting the thing happen. No assistants, no script supervisor, which I think can get in the way. And he doesn't seem too worried about continuity errors and an over focus on continuity.
And he also says that he's just because I haven't used one, and he also makes certain in the interview not to disparage them. He's like, I'm not disparaging script supervisors or any of these positions, but for the movies that I'm trying to make, it's not quite necessary. I haven't really had continuity editors. I've had, some folks, but they weren't professional by any means on some of the earlier films like the Moral Tales. But he says it hasn't led to any continuity errors in not using them. He just keeps such close sort of track of everything, and it's moving at such a mellow pace that if that's the way you're working, it is possible.
I had a film school professor who once said that a director's job was they're the ones doing the film. Everyone else on set is doing their jobs, but the film director is doing the movie.
Yeah,
which I think is a really great way
to great quote.
Actually great way. Antonio Tibaldi, great way to describe it. And I think the elimination of some of these roles also means that everyone is doing the film as opposed to doing their jobs. Again, the lack of industrialization might mean you can find things and improvise things and make these kinds of changes.
Everyone is doing the film. That's fucking beautiful.
It's great. Yeah. Everyone is doing the film.
And it makes
that. Hey, Sean, you can keep that.
That's beautiful. And it's that feeling of a student film. Like this sounds
which is the best feeling. Just wanting to make a movie to make it is the greatest.
An established director essentially making a student film, but with the most sophisticated thought process, having been through so many different sort of years of making movies.
And he called this film and Le Rayon Vert his amateur films, like movies that were kind of made. And we're not approaching these movies chronologically, which at times I feel challenged by, if only because, and we've discussed this previously, I feel a little limited sometimes by my lack of knowledge about before. But if
that allows you to just look at this on its own terms.
Right, exactly. But if I can speculate, which is a fun thing to do, I think the historical films he made before this were probably sort of the most gluttonous Rohmer kind of productions and the most like production oriented. I mean, anytime you're trying to do historical drama, especially, is that it becomes complicated by location and production design and all these elements that
those
challenge
costume sets, production
and it feels
design.
like a reset. He at this point in his career he wanted a reset and to do an improvised kind of thing. And honestly, again, this idea of a small film, I find it very I think it'd be very liberating to make a movie. And not,
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel, but
It's
sometimes
like
I
Wong
think,
Kar-wai with Chungking Express. You know, he had
right,
just finished Ashes of Time, which was this laborious production, then made Chungking Express in 3 months from beginning to end. Very
probably for
quickly,
very little. And
for
that's one of
very
his
little
most
might,
celebrated movies.
based on location, based on
Right.
access, writing the night before in a very improvised way. And you capture lightning in a bottle, you capture freshness. Nothing is overwrought.
Because you don't have time to be overwrought,
There's no time to do it.
and
Yeah.
thinking is the enemy of this
Yeah.
kind of art making.
Yes.
Speaking of not overthinking it, so I didn't know this until I read the book, but the film was improvised with based. The film was written based on improvisations and situations with the actors using two techniques. One was called the pivot style, and the other was the Pollock style. The pivot style meant that the actor spoke sort of like speechified monologue to some extent and was not interrupted, and at the end, the other actor, responded. The pivot style is more like one on top of each other, just kind of talking to each other, which lended a kind of naturalness. And there was he used these two styles clearly to make this movie.
That's a very important distinction for us to remember as filmmakers. If we are writing dialogue or we're thinking of the way two characters are interacting, essentially you have one or two of these. And if you think of human interactions, it kind of comes down to one or two of these, right? It's either the pivot style. Right now I feel like we are speaking in the pivot style, but later on when we get into personal philosophy and debating these characters and their viewpoints, we might get a little into the Pollock style, where we'll be interrupting each other and getting a little little less precise.
We should make that part of the show. Okay, pivot style, this topic, Pollock style. You see, we're making the show up as we go. I think we should jump ahead and talk about sort of each chapter of the show, but of the film, I should say. But one thing that I think speaking to me about this style, and I haven't made a movie in a while, is that I appreciate a filmmaker who creates a movie based on what he has instead of conjuring up a scenario. Because so much of film production technique really everywhere in the world now is come up with a good idea and make a movie, as opposed to
Terrible
what do I
advice.
have? I have these three, and he's smart. He hires young people who may not have families and large commitments and the challenges that someone might have in their life to go off and make a movie for 6 months or whatever the case is. But he kind of uses the circumstances around him to make the movie, and it results in these really interesting, and honestly, we can have a conversation about this, but I think some of the acting in Rohmer films is some of the best acting I've ever seen in a movie, but I don't judge it in terms of emotion or whatever. It's the really true idea of what acting is supposed to be, which is living truthfully under imaginary circumstances. And every moment of this film, with the exception of one, but I think it is intentional, and we'll get into it, feels really lived in. Feels really, really lived in.
Totally. His acting is, I think, the standard for me in terms of in my definition of what I find to be perfect acting, it's what is found in Rohmer films. And it's exactly what you said. It's truly living as these characters, in this imaginary circumstance. It's what also makes every episode of this, as we're getting ready to talk about these episodes, feel a little bit like a sitcom. And this is something we brought up in the last episode as well.
Sitcoms, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's such a sitcom quality to it.
It's beautiful. You said something on the phone the other day of with a sitcom or with a show, essentially is once you've set up the characters, you just see these characters that on adventures. And that's essentially what we get in this movie.
I think in that case, what I was talking about specifically was actually what I'm finding HBO is doing in some of its series, which is once you get, a season, they do this with Succession, which, a lot of people watch. And another, I think, really underseen show called Industry. They're in the second season of that show now. And the third episode of the season took place at a hunt, where a bunch of rich people were going hunting with all their, and there's a lot of political motivations to what's going on, and there's bankers in that scene, there's investors, there's a Tory, it's the show set in England, and there's all these sort of reasons for people to converge in this moment. And because we've gotten to know the characters, we can kind of watch them exist in a scenario. And I love that show. And the next episode seems to be doing the same thing, where all the characters kind of go on a trip somewhere together. And Succession does that. I don't know if you watched that show, but in this third season,
Well, I've seen episodes of it, and I think that's why Succession works for me as a show. Is I hate shows where I feel like I need to watch every single episode. That's not the kind of TV I'm super interested in. So
Yeah.
when my wife watches Succession, and so I'll see random episodes, and I could always jump in. Like, it's always enjoyable. I know enough about the characters, and you just get to watch what feels like a standalone.
And it's a show about cyclical behavior. Like, not the characters change, but not that much, really. Like, they change over seasons as opposed to in episodes, I would say. And so as a result, like my wife, for example, did not watch the first season. Half watched the second half of the second season with me, and then watched the entire third season, but like was not devoted, but knew enough. I felt like you could just jump into that show. And again, movies and
it's a great way to watch TV.
It is. And I think it reveals things about shows that are really interesting. And we might talk a little bit more about this, but there's a big difference, obviously, between movies and TV. And I think we can talk about how we consume this, which I think is a great natural segue into talking very, very briefly. I don't think we have to. We've talked about how this film has 4 episodes. Let's define what those 4 episodes are. Presumably, you've watched this movie if you've listened to this far into the podcast. If you haven't, we'll give you a brief down TLDR, as the kids say, about the 4 episodes. So the first episode is called The Blue Hour. Should I talk? You want to talk about it? Do you want to do it?
Yeah, I'd love. So just the simplest. The blue hours are set up for this entire film. With this setup, what we're introduced to is a young woman named Mirabelle riding her bicycle in the countryside, and she gets a flat tire. Strangers on a Train style, we cut to a young woman with a basket, Reinette, walking down the road, and then the two meet. And then she helps her fix her tire, and then they start to become friends over this short episode.
They eat some food together. They meet a farmer who's clearly a real farmer. That's just a regular guy talking, and Rohmer's filming it.
Yeah. And it has, I'll want to come back to that a little later. It has what I feel is the key line to this movie.
And they decide to live together in Paris. And we cut to episode 2, which is called The Waiter, where...
Oh, and the just before we move to episode 2, the main situation in episode 1 is the witnessing of this meteorological moment in time of the blue hour. It's a moment at dawn when all the animals are asleep. The night animals have gone to sleep, and it's before the morning birds have started to sing their song. And it lasts for shorter than a minute.
Écoute. Le crapaud.
And it's something that Reinette, being from the country, really wants to share with Mirabelle. And the pursuing of this event is the main sort of dilemma in this episode. But lots of other beautiful things that happen over.
And I think it's worth saying that it sort of sets up later some sort of character tensions when Reinette and Mirabelle miss the blue hour their first night because a car goes by, and Reinette becomes very upset by it. She's like, I just wanted this to be special.
C'est pas vrai, non? Dépêche-toi, bon sang!
Mais t'énerve pas comme ça.
Mais une minute, c'est court, tu comprends?
And Mirabelle's like, dude, chill. It's cool. These things happen. And I think that, like, upon retrospect, I haven't thought about it until this moment, that sort of sets up the kind of, if there is an inherent conflict between the two of them, it's their world views and philosophical ideas of, like, Reinette is trying to capture every moment, whereas Mirabelle's a little more like, Time is fleeting and moving, and not everything is as serious as all that.
Reinette, Mirabelle sort of represents this little more like popular sort of like common sense, worldview.
Yeah, like kind of a city girl, even though in real life she's a country girl, and Reinette is the city girl, which is an interesting kind of.
Oh,
yeah.
Really?
I mean, they were both sort of raised in the country, but Reinette moved to a community outside of Paris that she references in the film as where her cousins live.
Oh,
I forget the name of it, unfortunately. But they don't read that way at all. But they are sort of the inverse, according to
That's interesting. But again, the way you look is part of the visual storytelling, and they both have very unique looks that just kind of like perfectly also help develop the characters.
Totally.
Their styling, their costuming, the way they smile, the way they react to each other, they're not quite opposites, but I think there's a lot to learn over here of like having different philosophies on life and how you can still be in a relationship with someone, how you can still be friends with somebody.
Talk about that next once we get through these descriptions, because I think that'll clarify. So the second episode is called The Waiter, and basically Reinette is meeting Mirabelle at a cafe. She now lives in the big city. She lives in Paris. Her classes end around 3:00, and she goes to wait at a cafe, and she only has a 200 franc note, and her coffee that she orders costs $4. And unfortunately, she encounters the worst waiter in the fucking world, who chides her and says she can't leave because he can't break her 200 franc note, I should say.
And everyone has been in a situation like this.
It's fucking awful.
This is some
it
version
won't happen
of this
anymore.
has
this film is so analog in a way that like it's like, it's just, I partially feel like I don't pay with cash that much anymore. So it's like, who cares? But buying a coffee,
it won't happen in America.
That's for sure. It will not happen in America, but the rest of the world.
It can still happen elsewhere.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. Mirabelle shows up and she's like, fuck this guy. And they leave. And Reinette goes back the next day to pay because she's a chump. The next chapter,
what you would characterize as a trump, she would characterize as a personal integrity.
Okay, cool, bro.
We'll come back to that.
The beggar, the kleptomaniac, and the hustler is the third chapter, and this is when the philosophical differences between these two women really come into relief. Reinette gives a person on the street some money. She then chides Mirabelle for not giving him money and says that people should give whenever they can. It's a little bit of a philosophical difference that leads into a scene where Mirabelle and what I think is the best scene in the movie from a filmmaking perspective. I didn't really understand what was happening until much later in the scene personally. But Mirabelle basically obfuscates a situation and stops a kleptomaniac from getting caught by some like shop detectives who are watching this woman who's clearly stealing some smoked salmon and some champagne and stuff like that. When Mirabelle brings that stuff home for Reinette's birthday, Reinette refuses to eat it when she finds out that it's been stolen, and this leads to a sort of like philosophical debate about how to help people, whether it's to be a mirror and to show them how to behave. Sorry, I'm sort of letting my feelings on this be known, or like to help to, I don't know,
or addressing the system.
Addressing
Mirabelle
the system.
Is like focusing like the systemic issues that are at play.
So this leads to a bit of an argument, and this chapter sort of ends with them not really fully in agreement. But Reinette's clearly been affected by these last two incidences with the waiter and her arrogant altruistic perspective being challenged, that she decides she wants to leave the city.
Go
ahead.
Both of those things. It's both of those things. It's arrogant and it's altruistic. And the conversations or certain arguments or conflicts don't necessarily get resolved at the end of a scene. And that's also just another example of what a great writer that Rohmer is, because he'll have these arguments and then the answer or the resolution kind of comes in the next scene or in a following scene, where you see how and indirectly how their actions now are affected and maybe changed, and they have different perspectives on what they had been arguing about based on the action in the next scene.
Would you like to tell us about the fourth chapter, Selling the Painting?
Yes. So in Selling the Painting,
which is the fourth and final chapter of the film.
Fourth and final chapter.
And the shortest by a significant amount. It's only like 17 minutes long.
And the funniest. It is like
and the most scripted.
Funny. And completely scripted.
You feel it.
Completely scripted. And he made it clear in the interview that every line of Fabrice Luciani, who plays the art dealer, is exactly what's written in the script.
And that's the most acted character, and that's what I wanted to come back to, is that for very distinct reasons feels like one of the sort of like, I'm watching an actor give a performance. Now, it's not bad or get in the way.
It still feels
completely natural, but it is one of them, maybe because it is scripted, it feels as though that character is there to serve a function in a way which is very different from any of the other characters in this movie who we feel as though we are observing. He is an antagonist in a film that does not have a classical antagonist.
Right. And then that's a character like that needs to be written.
100%
for the specific
because if
situation.
we want to think again, like this, if some portion of this movie is vibes, if some of it is just watching people live and watching them come into conflict to one another, you need for the film to have a sense of real clear resolution, which I do believe that Rohmer wants, even though I think it addresses the relationship between Mirabelle and Reinette, not the sort of conflict ideologically between them, not in direct terms, but that they are reunited at the end of the film in a bit of a classical human comedy, as you like it Shakespearean comedy way, where the tensions are gone, but they're not necessarily resolved. It's like a reunion, a wedding, the way that Shakespeare will end a comedy. There's a little bit of that in there. That was a digression, but I think that that's part of it as well, a little bit.
Oh yeah, that's the moment of finality in a movie that might feel like it doesn't have an ending. There is a moment that feels like finality, and it's exactly what you said of like we see this divide and we get to see the reunion, but it's never. That's not the point of it. That's not what he's trying to show, but that is the ending.
Yeah, 100%. And so it ends basically. We should give the little plot synopsis there.
Yes.
Reinette is running out of money. She needs money. There's interest in a painting of hers that she would like to sell, but she has taken a vow of silence because, and this is very interesting, they have Reinette and Mirabelle have a discussion that like you can't really talk about a painting. The second you talk about art, it kind of loses its meaning, and that people talk about art too much, which welcome to this podcast. And
welcome to the character of Reinette, who in this film she rationalizes and talks through every single thought she has in her head, and especially about her art. And it becomes this funny moment where she's talking about how you can't talk about art for 5 minutes. And then Mirabelle's just looking at her, smiling and being like, you're doing it. And then
100%.
That's when she says, as someone that lives by her principles, says, I will not speak all day tomorrow. And then she gets a call back from the art dealer for a meeting to sell the painting. And it's tomorrow, the day that she decides that she's not going to speak, and she decides to continue and maintain the wager.
And to solve the problem, she brings Mirabelle. So when Mirabelle poses as a browser in the art gallery, and Reinette comes in, and the actor playing the art gallery owner, the art dealer, Fabrice Lucchini, a Rohmer regular, who apparently did very, very funny impressions of Eric Rohmer. Sort of mansplains at her, condescends to her, tells her like he loves her art, but when she actually asks for money, he's kind of like, well, I can't sell this. And she asks for the money up front, but she's not talking. So he's sort of in a great commedia dell'arte kind of way, drawing ideas from her and walking all over her. And Mirabelle,
but then also like showing respect, and also like he's not just a villain. You know, there's
no, but when it comes to the money,
saying,
it becomes the lowest common denominator, I think, to some extent, right? He's like, I can give you 200 francs, and it's
but also I think speaking from like the realistic perspective of a gallery owner, right? Like in that world, like until it's sold.
God,
like,
you're such a Reinette. Yeah. You're such a Reinette.
I know, man.
Classic
I know,
Reinette.
Dude. I feel like a Reinette.
You're a Reinette. But Mirabelle comes to her defense, and she manages to wrest $2,000 from the gallery owner. Reinette and Mirabelle leave together. They're maybe, again, not the conflicts between them, perhaps not resolved, but certainly like reunited.
But there's no conflict to resolve. We could have true. In those senses.
There's a philosophical difference, but their friendship outweighs it.
Yeah, exactly. Friendship outweighs it, and I think that's a beautiful thing. We could be friends with people that we don't necessarily agree exactly on every single point.
Sure. Yes. It feels harder and harder, so that's why this movie might be like a bit of a relief. The art gallery is left in his gallery with the painting Reinette's painting sitting on a table. Two women are browsing. One picks up the painting. The last line in the movie is she asks him how much for this painting, and he says 4,000 francs.
After saying, I'm not sure I could even sell it for 2,000, maybe 1,500.
Does not
once he starts feeling the pressure of like having to pay her.
And it doesn't feel particularly optimistic about the state of art selling in 1987, which is when this film comes out. It's interesting to think of a Rohmer movie being made as recently as 1987, because to me, he feels like a 60s and 70s filmmaker. I mean, his career lasted for so long. So it is really interesting that this film is when I was 5 years old, for example. I just find that
right.
is really, really fascinating. You love this film.
I'm in love with this movie. I
Sean,
love it.
You're married.
And I am in love with it.
You're a big fan.
Yeah, there are movies that you watch where, I don't know, like I just have this like, I don't know if you get this, but I literally feel this feeling as if like you're falling in love. And I feel that movie with this movie where like I'm just like completely charmed by it in every single way. I think it's thematically beautiful. I think the whole idea behind it is amazing. I think the characters are really, really perfectly realized characters and kind of remind us like what great characters look like in movies. And he talks about this in this interview of like strong personalities, people where things happen to them and they make things happen. And it's like, wow, if that's not the best definition of what a character is.
Things happen to them and they make things happen. Sure.
Yeah. Like, are you the kind of person where like, then is there action around you? Is there activity? Is life happening around you? And are you a participant in it? And every single character of his, and these two characters too, like perfectly embody this idea. And of another thing that he loves, which is the ridiculous character. He says he loves ridiculous characters, and there's truth in what is ridiculous about all of us.
I liked. How'd you watch the film? You saw it at Metrograph?
I saw it in the theaters at Metrograph, and it was an afternoon screening on a weekday, and it was about half full. And there was a family behind me with a teenage daughter, and I thought, that's really cool.
That is cool.
That's like a really great thing.
Yeah, bringing a kid to a movie like this is very, very cool. I liked the film a lot. I liked it more the next morning. I watched it at home after putting a child to bed with a Manhattan, so I was a little sleepy. But I had a good experience with it. I'm going to be totally honest with you, and I think this can lead into our conversation about. I'd like to talk about philosophy.
Are we switching to the Pollock style,
but
or are we maintaining the pivot style?
Let's see where it goes, baby. I fell asleep with 10 minutes left. Not because I was bored, but because it was like 11.
In the peak of the art
fell
dealer
asleep during
scene
the
with
art
all that
scene,
tension.
with all the tension.
Will she
problem is
sell
I
it? Will
lie
she
down
not?
when I watch movies. So what I did is when I woke up, I rewound it and watched that entire segment again. I didn't start at the beginning of the movie.
Okay.
And I think this is interesting because we talked a little bit about film and TV earlier, but like I did make the effort. I tried really hard to make sure I sat and watched this thing from beginning to end, which I'll admit has been a challenge for me. But I have to ask, is there a little bit of TV in this movie? Like, could we watch this as 4 discrete episodes over a period of, I don't know, 2 nights? Like,
so
I just wonder. It's a little.
Could this be episode? Like,
it
it's
is a little
movie and
closer to
episodes,
TV
but
than
could it
movie.
be episodes?
And I guess that makes me want to ask about your like personal feeling on how you watch movies, especially movies that aren't like necessarily that well made for home viewing. In my opinion, increasingly with the proliferation of like us expecting to watch things at home, the value of a lot of the things that get released feel like you can second screen them or be distracted by them, and so therefore you need like the biggest possible fucking thing for you to watch, or something that's an hour long. Like, I think I'm engaged in the attention war of trying to really focus on things that deserve my attention at home. And I would have, by the way, I'm not advocating to watch this at home. I think these movies are I think all movies are much better seen on a big screen. But in absence of that, which is this case, I then struggle with the need to watch it in a 90-minute sitting.
So this is great. I mean, I think this we're getting a little into our personal philosophies as it comes to movie watching and TV, and like how these things relate to each other. We're in this age of what people describe as cinematic television. I have some sort of like issues with that description of cinematic television because I think it comes down to sort of how do we define what is cinema, and I don't think it's just like the look of a movie. Oh,
for sure, I agree with you.
Yeah.
There.
In terms of the viewing of this, though, like they are discrete episodes, but the power of these episodes is that it's the cumulative effect of seeing it all together. And I think you don't get the cumulative effect of it all. You could watch it all as like these episodes. If you watched one episode each night, like you'd be like, oh, this is cool. Oh, another fun little adventure. But you're not going to have that effect, which is ultimately what every movie should sort of leave us with, of like, what is the thing of it feeling complete? And completion doesn't come in each single episode. The completion comes from seeing them become friends and seeing this moment in their friendship at the very end, like you said, where they are now like reunited again. And so to me, this could not be just episodes, even though they work as episodes. I mean, like, I feel like Eric Rohmer would have loved Seinfeld. Maybe he did love Seinfeld. It was on while he was alive and could have been a great writer on it.
He could have been a great writer on it. I think the key word that you just said that sort of shifted my opinion is the accumulation of details. This is a quote. I'm using this, putting this in a small movie. And small movies, meaning movies, I think that translates to like, this is a movie about character and about building understanding of who the people are. They're character studies. These movies are character studies. And so,
but not character studies in like what is often an overwrought sort of way.
An
like
American independent
study, like,
cinema character study model. Right.
Fuck.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree with you there. Yeah. I agree with you there.
They're character studies in the way that Friends is a character study. Like, honestly, these are just like, they're verite sitcoms in a way.
A verite sitcoms is very good. Yeah, they're accumulations of information that build to a meaning that you as the audience get and leave you to think about. I was saying earlier that like Eric Rohmer films give me an art hangover, which is a very positive thing. The next morning I feel like a little buzz and I'm usually like a little tired. I'm like, oh, I just had like an experience, you know? I felt that way watching the film Nightmare Alley recently, which I had to watch in 2 sittings, and I like woke up the next morning and I felt like, oof.
The original or the
the Bradley Cooper, the Guillermo del Toro one, which I think is an astonishingly fucking great movie in a lot of ways. I felt that every Sunday night watching the new Irma Vep series. I'd wake up the next, or Tuesday morning, waking up from the Monday morning screening, being like, ooh, art is a thing. But so I do think that this film ultimately, the episodic label only becomes every 40 or 20 minutes we get a title card for a new segment of the film. And we've decided to apply the word episodes to that, which doesn't feel accurate because in a way they're a little more like Godardian interruptions, right? Like they interrupt and tell you what to focus on the next segment. They're very sort of like Brechtian things that point to the important thing. Like, what are this is what you're observing in the next storyline, right?
It sets the premise. Yeah, it sets up the central point, or not even point. These aren't movies that are meant to make a point, or but the central idea of each. And segment, they whether it's the Blue Hour, or like we're talking about the beggar, the kleptomaniac, and the grifter,
right?
Or right. So it allows you to sort of like, okay, now you mentally adjust and you apply these characters, and you're kind of intrigued. You're interested of like, oh, what is this? Like you lean in a little bit more, like, oh, what's it going to be like when Reinette has to encounter a rude French waiter? Perhaps it's a rude French waiter.
Right. Well, yeah, it's a French waiter, so it's probably a rude French waiter. To use the stereotype.
It's another way of using a technique that increases audience engagement. It's not a telegraphing thing. It's a thing that's like, here's the focus. Now let's see.
Well, I would argue also that it is the antithesis of what television is, which is a title at the beginning of a part of a movie is a tool of compression. It tells you, like, let's focus on this thing. And you know what TV is almost never about? Compression. TV is always about expansion. And I think that, like, one of the things that makes TV feel less special to me, and look, and I think this can lead into our personal philosophy section. What makes TV, in theory, less appealing to me is that it is not compression, is expansion. It doesn't feel like it has a finite thing. Whereas when I watch a movie, I know it's going to end tonight. I know it's going to end in an hour and 40 minutes. I know
you get a complete experience.
Satan Tango, it's going to end in 6 hours, right? But I know that it ends, right? The idea, by the way, like Satan Tango is one thing when it was on Criterion. I was like, I can't watch it here because I'm going to pause it for 45. I have to see it in the movie theater. Right. Something I've done now 3 times. But like, I think the opposite of it is compression.
Yeah.
And so when we watch a movie, even one with episodes, we're having a compressed experience, and that's how the film is delivered to us. Though Rohmer released the film at a short film festival initially. It premiered at a short film festival. He loved short
Interesting.
films.
As a series of 4 shorts.
I think it played as a whole, but
he kind of cheated. He kind of cheated the system.
I think he did, but that's fine. Good. At this point, what, he's 400.
All the other shorts filmmakers were pissed as fuck.
Yeah, they were
what the fuck? Rohmer gets to come and just play 4 shorts.
It's that classic thing where it's like, wait a minute. This thing has 3 10-minute films, and then those short films in 1987 were probably 30 to 40 minutes long, right? They've only compressed.
They were longer,
past. Yeah. And now they're kind of coming back again. Like,
the long short.
One of the great things about the lack of standardized lengths of things in TV now, which is a really good thing, is that you can make something of any length, and you'll see if people want to watch it.
Just make it the right length, but a lot of folks, like you said, compression versus expansion. A lot of people have problems compressing, and so you get unnecessary glut. So I have not seen.
That's why we have fascism too, by the way.
I mean, I'm a fascist for movies.
Well, this is interesting.
Cut the unnecessary glut.
Here's the I don't know if that's fascism. Here's the thing.
Is that a fucked up quote that I'm going to be attributed to forever now?
I'm a fascist for movies. Is actually what that sounds like.
Man.
But,
oh my God.
But here's the thing that's interesting, and I think leads into our conversation about the personal philosophies. I like to watch movies how I watch them. I get there might be a distinction between TV and film is special, whatever. But I don't give a fuck, because I just want people to encounter things. Like, my personal philosophy about this movie is that Reinette is a pain in the ass and Mirabelle is right, like 99.9% of the time. I can't tolerate. And good, look at. It's not a real person, so I'm not actually mad about it, right? But she's like a young, naive person moving to a big city with ideals, and that's like really, really great. But like her almost inability to change it all really frustrates me in the movie.
Sure.
And like,
a very real person, a very
real young person.
Yeah, and also just like I think of family members that one might have, and definitely like younger folks for sure, with the sort of like the strong idealism, with the very black and white view of things. There's no understanding of a gray area, and what makes, I think, the expression of their different points of views tolerable and interesting, and like I think respectable on no matter which side you might agree with more or less, is that it's always tied to an inherently human value. The human value of like, how do we fix this thing? And like, if you divorce it from like political implications, it's tied to like a very real and honest and not necessarily wrong feeling. But they're just two totally different points of views.
But I think it's impossible to divorce it from the political surroundings of it.
But the movie isn't doing it, but it's hard for us, I think,
the
as
movie
an
isn't doing the
characters.
It. Sorry, I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if the movie's, well, like in terms of it tying to more like sort of like political.
Well, no, I think the movie is allowing the characters, like Reinette seems to not understand that there are systematic problems when it comes to people begging on subway trains. People, the sort of like the fact that a woman takes money from her, there's no thought on her part of like, these are larger problems than just an individual person's experience. Whereas I think Mirabelle is able to look at the system a little more. The system that created these inequalities, which obviously very literally timely to the day that we're recording this podcast, right? But
so there's a moment. The main episode, the main section where they get this difference in philosophy is, how do we help people? It starts off with, who do we give money to? Which is a very interesting question that gets brought up. Who do we give money to? At certain points, I'm sure. This I can't say I'm sure. Some of us will give to people we see on the streets. Some of us don't. Some of us have, and we all have specific views on it, but we maybe never verbalized it. But we have characters over here that are interrogating, like, well, how do you decide who you give to? Oh, do they look nice?
Which is wild. It's crazy that she says that. Do they look nice?
But I think these are things that actually like
are true.
People think about. These are true things, and like we just hear it verbalized, which is kind of like a crazy thing. Because like I found so just to give you a real story. After watching this movie, I was talking about this with my wife. We were in Portland, Maine, and we were walking on the street, and we were talking about this situation in the movie. And I was like, and it made you wonder, like, how do we decide, like, who do we give to, or like, how conscious is it, or how conscious are we of our choices that we're making? And I saw someone on the street, like right at that moment in time, and I had opened my wallet, I had some cash, and I gave him $2. Then I saw another person like on the next block. So then I said, well, I gave the other person $2. I can't give this person $2. And then I gave that person $2. And then I kept walking, and I saw another person, and then I had my last $2. And then I gave him my last $2 that I had. And then after that,
you had no dollars.
I had no dollars, and therefore it's not like I didn't encounter other homeless folks. It just stopped being my problem anymore at that point. And it was like a thing of just like, oh, well, it's like, yeah, what do I do? I'm not going to go to the ATM and just continue to do it. You're not able to help everybody out. And we all make these choices consciously or not consciously.
You're being human. That's just being a human with a consciousness existing
but
over
how often
linear
do
time.
and how often do we think about those choices in this movie? You get to see the sort of interrogation of these choices and like that we don't even think about, and what's conscious and what's not conscious, and the way we live out our beliefs.
Yeah, and I think that part of the problem is I've become one of those cynical people that like can't stand naivete a little bit, and I'll cop to that. I also think it's to continue from our conversation on The Aviator's Wife, which, by the way, I think is a much more multifaceted and complex meditation on identity than this movie is. Which, while this movie is great, don't get me wrong, I think you're seeing things in it that like I need to reflect on. And you have watched it twice, where I have watched it once. But the polar kind of opposites of these two is not as interesting to me as the many identities, for example, that Francois takes on over the course of The Aviator's Wife. It is a far more existentially challenging work. By the way, as a quick side note, this is a digression, I'm reading that Eric Rohmer biography right now, which we'll link to, and he was obsessed with Sartre. He was obsessed with him. He was like his entry into sort of thinking about existentialism, which I just thought was really interesting because I think his films are very existential.
Yeah, and existential in very human ways, and philosophical in very human ways. He doesn't do the sort of philosophy that you see in movies. Let's say, like, think back to every 90s postmodern existential indie where characters talk about philosophy. It feels so written. It feels so like, here is my philosophical point. Well, now here's my philosophical point. And it's not organic. And this feels like human beings that are having a natural discussion that actually reveals their philosophy. They're not talking about philosophy. They're having conversations. Well,
it's ingrained
in
the directing of the film. I mean, Rohmer knows how to bring about what he wants people to talk about and what to say. For sure.
One interesting point about that is in the interview that I'd read, he's not taking any one side or the other, but he thinks the discussion is important and the conflict is important. So the conflict of these two debates or these two sides is the subject, more so than us feeling like we should be on any one side or the other side, or any side is right or wrong.
Which, to sound like a cranky old man, I think is something that's lost in art a little bit, is the idea. Like, so in my real life, I'm very, very pro taking a side. And I think that my real life intruded into my experience of watching this movie. Like, we had a conversation, to come back to what I was going to say before and forgot to, we had a conversation last time about how you find it, I find it very easy to be annoyed by a character in a film, to like take on what the effect they're having on the characters around them. I was very annoyed by Reinette in this movie.
Which she would be okay with, because she says, we all judge people.
Right. That's a good point. But in real life, like, my philosophy is like, no, take a side. Like, and it's clear to me in real life, quote unquote, whose side I would be on, right? Like, I'm a little more rational. I'm a little more like try to be systematic in my thinking. This show isn't about my personal philosophy, but I think the role of art is to challenge us to think about not both sides, because I think that unfortunately the phrase "both sides" is challenge in our
sure. But how do we live our lives? What is it saying about
what are we questioning in ourselves when we encounter a work of art?
Yeah.
And I think, to wrap this up, if that's all right with you, Rohmer's choice is to lean into his actors, to lean into his environments, gives the film, and I hate this, I don't even want to say documentary feel, I think that word's abused, but I prefer actually unscripted. I feel as though Rohmer's sort of choice, even though the film is scripted, to lean into unscripted elements of real life.
Yeah.
It's not a documentary that's like, and now I want to talk about this issue or this idea. It's more like, I want to observe,
Yeah, it feels like verite.
There's something.
Like, I guess that's the closest thing.
Yeah, I don't know if you've been watching the Nathan Fielder's The Rehearsal on HBO.
I haven't started
Oh,
yet.
it's phenomenal. But one of the things that makes it phenomenal is there was a great piece on IndieWire that linked back to films that feel as though they were inspired, that it was inspired by, like Robert Greene's documentaries, or John Wilson's shorts, or Abbas Kiarostami's films, right? And like these sort of films that exist at the real tension point of real life and nonfiction.
And which is I'd love to
go ahead.
Sorry,
no, I was just gonna say Rohmer is actually a great practitioner of the hybrid form.
Yeah, in a way that's always narrative though. He never says this is a documentary. He never says anything's a hybrid. These are narrative movies.
They're narrative films,
done with documentary, not forms, but
influences, process.
A little bit of
this scene where they speak to the farmer feels as though he was like, I'm going to have my actress here ask you some questions. Don't look at the camera.
Yeah.
And it's so natural and real.
And it's a real conversation.
But it borders a little bit on like a BBC style documentary. Not in a bad way. It's not like the aesthetics are not like pan, zoom, push in, voiceover, but more just like here's a verite style take on this.
Yeah. The camera's at a very usually a 50 millimeter or a little bit of a longer distance.
Right.
So we feel a little bit of the distance between the camera. It's not close up in front of their faces. It's not a documentary style in like an aggressive way at all.
Right.
We don't feel the camera's presence ever. There's a line in that scene, Liam,
yes, great place to end on, because you mentioned this before. Sorry.
He says, you can't always be right. The farmer says, you can't always be right. They're having a discussion about the weather. Is it going to rain? No, it's not supposed to rain. Oh, maybe I should get my raincoat.
Right.
And then the farmer's laughing at their hubris almost, and like trying to predict and trying to plan and make sure they're right. And he says, you can't always be right. And I think that's just like an amazing lesson for like this movie period, like the situations they get themselves into. Reinette sort of coming to these realizations of like moments when she can't be right, and Mirabelle as well. Both of them are in friendship discover these moments that you can't always be right. And I think it's just like, wow, what a beautiful kind of thought, idea, lesson to sort of be left with this movie. And like, imagine if we all went through life remembering that.
100%. And I think if we look at this from like a non-personal perspective, a quiet theme of this movie that I don't think is intentional at all, but I thought about a lot, was like encroaching modernity. The idea that like the world is changing, that pretty soon, it's 1987, pretty soon you're going to be able to look up the weather on your phone, and you're not going to be reliant on like the farmer telling you like, yeah, those are just these kinds of clouds and they don't indicate rain. Like we're going to like lose our connection to the natural world, which this movie is framed by this like beep, beep, boop, boop score that I think rules. But like there's an awareness of the tension between the natural world and the electronic encroaching world, the youth,
so
the digital world.
With this, with the modernity, with the music, it's so freaking good. Just like these very simple music cues, and it's so genius, Liam, because the title cards are very modern in design, very like, and modern for the 80s, which
Saved by the
dated.
Bell French style, baby.
Saved by the Bell French style, and it makes me realize like more things should be dated. It's good when things are dated because it gives you an honest record of what was modern at the time.
I 100%
and so
agree.
Through the music, you understand that was what was modern. The title cards let you know what was modern, and then what do you cut to? The countryside. So you've now immediately, from the opening 10 seconds of this movie, created a juxtaposition between modernity and the country. And then right there in 10 seconds, you've kind of set up the entire film.
And again, to come back to our larger conversation about Rohmer as a filmmaker and his working methods, encroaching modernity also meant smaller cameras, better ability to record.
This was shot on 16 millimeter.
On 16 millimeter, probably with better versions of the cameras that filmmakers like the Maysles brothers used to make Salesman 25 years before this. There were...
And with the same camera that everyone, if you went to film school in the 90s,
Bolex,
probably used.
or something like that.
The
Not
Bolex,
a Bolex,
or like
something like
an
a Bolex,
RESR2, or they were probably using the Aton camera since they were in France. But a version of a 16 millimeter camera that if you went to film school at a time where you were using that,
Yep.
Which now is becoming rarer and rarer, that's the same camera Rohmer used. It wasn't the most expensive fancy thing. It was just the camera that you could get at your local university.
Go make a movie right now.
This should be inspiration.
It's inspiring to me. I'm just shooting stuff.
Make
shoot
it
on
with
an
whatever.
iPhone. Who gives a fuck? Make a movie.
Yeah.
Let's wrap it up there. Next time on the show, Girlfriends and Boyfriends, which will be the completion of our summer
Boyfriends and Girlfriends, or My Boyfriend's Girlfriend.
Is that a potential?
It's had a few titles.
Wow, that'll be something to get into. That'll conclude our Summer of Rohmer series that we've been piggybacking off of the wonderful Metrograph Theater in New York City. Metrograph, come on the show. Somebody at Metrograph, come on the show. Come talk to us. We'd love it. Follow me on Twitter at Liam G. Billingham, where I post a little bit about this podcast. Don't follow me on Instagram because I post photos of my kids there. Soon to be kids. Ooh.
You can, have fun, man.
Thanks, buddy.
You can follow me at The Brown Sean, SHAUN, on all social media platforms. I even just joined Be Real today because I think it's important to stay up to date with what is modern.
What are the kids doing? You can
find me everywhere. I'm not on Snapchat and I don't really use TikTok, but I have accounts on there. But I'm active on Instagram, so The Brown Sean, and that's also my name on Letterboxd.
By the way, the reason I was grabbing my phone is because I wanted to check my Instagram name. I mean, my Letterboxd name, which I'm trying to be better about doing. I think I'm just Liam Billingham on. I don't think I have it. Yeah, Liam Billingham on Letterboxd, which I'm trying to update more of. Yeah, follow us there. Please review the show, subscribe to the show if you haven't. Now, this is an important announcement that I forgot to make at the beginning of the show. This podcast is currently on the feed for a podcast I used to do with my buddy George Fragopoulos, Ouvrebusters. It's going to move to its own feed starting ASAP. This episode is going to be posted to both feeds. In a few weeks, we're going to be moving the show entirely over to a RohmerCast feed, right? So if you search RohmerCast in wherever you listen to podcasts, in a few weeks, you'll be able to find a discrete feed for that show. We will remind you again and again. Every episode, the first 3 episodes of the show are going to be posted on the Ouvrebusters feed, and we're going to move over after that. It's a little confusing, but I will keep reminding you. And eventually, the RohmerCast feed that exists now will go back to Ouvrebusters, and we'll have our own distinct RohmerCast feed. You'll find the links for it everywhere. I'm just telling you now.
On a quick just summary, as not a podcast person, even though I'm on the podcast with you, but someone that's still learning this world, what you're basically saying is it'll have its own feed, but you could still always just find us by searching RohmerCast on whatever platform that you're using.
Exactly. And we'll have, we sort of launched this hastily because we wanted to start doing it, but in the coming weeks we will have URLs and web addresses that you'll be able to grab the show anytime. Just remember, RohmerCast, wherever you get your podcast. I'm overcomplicating this because I don't want to lose our listenership when we switch to our own feed. This has been great, Sean, as usual. Thanks, buddy.
Cannot wait. Tomorrow I'm seeing Boyfriends and Girlfriends, and I'm seeing it with 2 of my lovely actor friends that I collaborate with a lot. We're all interested in Rohmer, and so I'm very excited for tomorrow's viewing experience for the film.
Well, have fun.
As
I'm going to watch it on
movies together.
I'm going to watch it on my couch and probably fall asleep watching it. So again, we're having different experiences. This was RohmerCast.
You're such a Mirabelle.
I am. It's the best. I'm Liam Billingham.
I am Reinette. Sean, son of Aratna.
Bye, everybody. This was RohmerCast. Adieu. 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 Sean, will you sing the beep beep boop? RohmerCast. Wait, no, that's not it.
Oh, man.
Cut.
All right, we're done.